Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette,
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever. Films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie oubliette.
Hello everyone, you are listening to Movie Oubliette, a transcontinental podcast with me, Dan, all the way down the bottom of the world in Melbourne, Australia.
And me, Conrad, all the way up in Cambridge, UK.
In this podcast, we haul a lost and forgotten film from the depths of the oubliette of obscurity to decide whether to set it free into the world to be rediscovered and appreciated, or whether to cast it back down into the void that is the oubliette. We will mainly be discussing fantastic cinema, so horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, because as we all agree, those are the most delectable of film genres. So, Conrad, how are you today?
I'm just very impressed with your intro. I liked it.
It's my dream come true to say it properly for once.
Well, I'm very pleased because it's raining here in England, so all is well. It's been 6 or 7 weeks of 30-degree heat and no rain whatsoever, which has been quite a shock to the system. So it's cold and it's wet, so we're all feeling in our element here.
Back to complaining about the weather and how wet it is.
Yeah, we love it. How about you?
Yeah, I've been fine. It's been not as cold as it has been, but doing well.
Marvellous. So do we have any exciting things in our mailbag this week?
So we've had a comment from a listener called Corey Newman, and that is in regards to our second episode where we reviewed Demons, and he said this is word for word. I'm pretty sure this was the first horror movie I ever saw. My parents let me rent it when I was like 11 years old, and it actually scared the crap out of me. I was stoked that you guys chose this one, and I planned on rewatching it after listening to your show. So it's always good to know that we're bringing back suppressed childhood trauma with every episode.
Yeah, just ripping off that plaster and pouring lemon juice on it. That's great.
Yep, it's always good to hear. So more comments like that, please.
Definitely. Well, I had fun because for the first time on our Twitter account, we got some reaction from a person who starred in one of the films that we covered.
Ooh.
So last week we were talking about Pandorum, starring Ben Foster, and I tweeted something on the Movie Oubliette account, follow us there, about how Ben Foster's brother doesn't last very long in the movie, and he quote tweeted us and said, "So true."
That's very true. He's probably been resenting his brother ever since.
I'm sure, burning resentment. Yeah.
Yes. I also got a comment on our Facebook page from a listener called Martin Taylor in regards to the third episode that we did for Session 3, and he said LEDs were actually very rare and exotic and dim in the 70s when the film was shot. So the LEDs that I was referring to were most likely to be grain of rice bulbs, which I had never heard of, and they're apparently smaller than Christmas tree lights.
Oh, that's right, because you were thinking that the whole set was just full of LEDs, but no.
Grain of rice bulbs. I kind of like that.
Marvellous. So we learn something from our listeners too. This is good.
I'm always learning.
So I guess it's my turn to take the trip over to the oubliette and pull out our film for this episode.
The best part of the episode.
Yeah, okay. I shall get some exercise. Gotta get your steps in. Fitbit will be complaining. Hang on. Why is this trapdoor so flimsy all of a sudden?
Oh, okay. Must be some cost cutting.
Is this made of plastic? God, there are two very sinister looking black helicopters and they're flying right at me. Okay.
I'm gonna be sick.
Oh, do you know, a funny thing happened on the way to the oubliette.
No, nothing happened. Must be a faulty console. Thanks for bringing it to my attention, and we'll repair it shortly.
I will just move swiftly on with that strange denial.
So, Conrad, what do we have for us today?
Well, we have the 1978 science fiction conspiracy thriller Capricorn One, written and directed by Peter Hyams and starring Elliot Gould, James Brolin, Brenda Vaccaro, Sam Waterston, and O.J. Simpson.
Someone I did not know even acted, but I guess it was before my time.
Yeah, well before all our times. If you don't want us to spoil the movie, watch the movie first and then come back and listen to us. But yes, it's an interesting film. To summarize the plot, it's about the first manned mission to Mars, and as the film opens, the astronauts are getting into their rocket ship to be launched on their very special and exciting voyage. And while the countdown is happening, an anonymous man in a black suit comes to them and tells them to get out because it's an emergency. And they are then jetted away whilst a recording of their previous simulations of the launch continues to play and be broadcast live. And they're then told that the reason for this is because they've discovered months before the launch that the life support system wasn't going to work and they would have died on the way to Mars. But they need to cover this up, otherwise it'll be a huge embarrassment for NASA and they'll cut their funding. So they are asked to participate in a conspiracy to fake the Mars landings for the good of NASA and for the good of the US space program.
Yes.
With a few threats to their family thrown in for good measure. So that's the situation that the astronauts find themselves in, which is pretty unusual, quite interesting.
Sounds riveting. I can't wait to talk about it.
I know, and it's even more exciting today because we'll be talking about it with a third person this time. We have a special guest.
Wow.
So if you want to know who it is, stay with us. And we're back. So we'll be talking about Capricorn One, and as I teased before the break, we have a special guest. With us today is Serge, the writer-director of Cold Crash Pictures.
Yes.
Hello, Serge.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you here because I've been a big fan of your vlogs for a long time.
Thank you. I've actually, you mentioned that I am your first guest, and this is my first time guest starring on anything, really.
Well, we hope we make it a good experience for you and don't traumatize you in any way.
Likewise.
It's also worth noting that we are all in different continents, different parts of the world. I'm in Melbourne, Conrad's in the UK, and Serge, you are in...
I am in Chicago.
Wow. Yeah, so this is the first time we've managed to add a continent, which is great.
Very particular recording schedule times.
So Dan are we allowed to say that you're still in your PJs?
I am still in my PJs. Yes, I'm proud PJ wearer at 7:22 a.m. in the morning. I think that's pretty normal.
So Capricorn One. So this is really a post-Watergate conspiracy thriller. But the interesting thing about it is that, for me, is that because it's Peter Hyams, who we can talk about a little bit as a writer-director, it's sort of filtered through the summer blockbuster style of movie making, very much following in the footsteps of Jaws. It's sort of a high-concept thriller more than a gritty late 70s thriller, I thought.
Yeah. Music-wise, it kind of reminded me of later thrillers, and especially in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, when I watched it for the first time and I didn't know much about it going in, and I was, sort of taken by how the 1970s of it all, but then in particular when the score kicked in, it suddenly felt very new and very modern.
Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith is my favorite composer. And this is interesting because it kind of bridges the gap between his very avant-garde work in something like Planet of the Apes to the sort of action material that he was doing for thrillers like Air Force One in the 90s. So it's a full orchestral score, but it's still got these very jagged time signatures that throw you off guard all the time. I think the main theme to Capricorn One is 11/8 or something like that, which is really bizarre.
Jerry Goldsmith, he did the score to Alien. Is that him?
It is, yes, and that's a very avant-garde score.
Yeah, right.
So I didn't know that Jerry Goldsmith did the score when I sat down to watch it for the first time, and so it kicked in. And literally my first thought was, "Wow, this guy's really ripping off Jerry Goldsmith." I might have paused the movie, and then I was like, "Oh, okay."
Amazing.
But yeah, it's really rather, it's very emblematic in a way that I feel like it should be more popular. It should pop up more on classic movie soundtrack compilations.
Yeah, it's a fantastic score. I mean, among Goldsmith enthusiasts, it's often referred to as sort of a pinnacle in his achievement in action writing, for sure. But it's not just the action writing, it's the unease he gives it. There are some fantastic sequences in the movie where he is really underlining the horrible weight of the conspiracy that the astronauts are participating in. I think particularly the scene where they are stood on their fake Mars landing set and the camera is slowly panning around them while the voice of the President of the United States talking about how brave and wonderful they are and what a great vision for the future they represent. And Jerry is scoring it with this real sense of sickly unease on sustained strings, and it's quite disturbing, I think, that whole sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the soundtrack was juxtaposed with the footage, in particular, really well. Really good composer in tandem with the director and editor there, because the drama is not necessarily being generated by what we're watching, but how they're juxtaposing all this triumphant imagery taken straight from the Apollo 11 landing footage, but with, like you said, he's got this unease in the strings going in the soundtrack. And then, of course, that particular scene, it's intercut with not just the speech and the guys on the soundstage, but also with people cheering in bars and people hooting and hollering out on the streets of America. But then, of course, it's all a lie.
It is.
Yeah. I always feel like 70s action is a little bit lame. Like, I always find just fight scenes are just a little bit, that's a bit boring. Like, one punch here, a duck. Like, it's all very slow moving.
A New Hope comes to mind.
And I always feel like score always makes up for the kind of lack of visuals in terms of action. And Jerry Goldsmith really brought his A game in terms of elevating scenes to be much more interesting than they should be. There's that scene with the rattlesnake and the character Brubaker, and he's kind of dueling with this rattlesnake, and it's pretty boring to watch, but score-wise, very exciting.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about Jerry, particularly at this time, I know later in his career he hated the fact that he had to score so much of the films that, you would have a 2-hour movie and you'd have 90 minutes of score.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas back in these days he was fairly sparse in how he spotted his movies. And so something like Coma, which is another conspiracy thriller, I don't think you hear a peep out of Jerry for the first half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes.
Wow.
And in this one, Jerry is notably absent in key action sequences, particularly the finale, which I think if people who have seen Capricorn One will remember the helicopter biplane chase that happens at the end. And not a peep out of Jerry throughout that whole sequence. Very similar to Bernard Herrmann's treatment of another famous scene involving a crop duster.
Are you going to say North by Northwest?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Which, again, not a peep out of Bernard Herrmann during that entire sequence until the plane crashes.
As we're recording this, it's been like a week and a half since I saw Mission Impossible Fallout, which, mild spoiler, ends with a sort of helicopter chase. And it's funny, I had rewatched Capricorn 1 a couple of days before going in to see Mission Impossible Fallout. And I'm watching the finale of Mission Impossible Fallout, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, it's good, I guess. And I was trying to recall how heavy the score was in Mission Impossible Fallout. I can't quite recall, which is probably a testament to the stunt work, which wasn't bad. But it's interesting to watch the chase sequence in a brand new film and then the chase sequence from 40 years ago. If I were teaching a college course, I would show both chase sequences and then we'd discuss them.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I read up about that chase sequence, and apparently the stuntman and the choreographer as well said that was the most harrowing, dangerous chase sequence that ever taken place. And so it feels dangerous even watching it, just knowing that it's all, real helicopters and a real biplane.
There was one shot in particular during the chase where one of the military helicopters swoops in above the biplane and then it taps its strut on the plane's wing to try and crash it. And I thought that maybe that was the one shot in the entire sequence that was sort of faked, but then it was the 70s and maybe they did it for real. I don't know for that particular shot.
No, I looked this up. It's real.
Oh
And
my gosh.
That's the thing. It scared the crap out of them because they had to create a special camera mount to get that shot.
Right.
And they were terrified while they were doing it because the one thing you really do not want to do with a helicopter and a plane mid-flight is touch each other. You just
Nope.
don't want to do that. Especially when your star is looking up at you from the cockpit, which he is. He's there. Elliot Gould is there. So it's the kind of crazy shit that only happened in Hollywood movies in the 70s. I mean, it's notable that for the Mission Impossible movie you mentioned, Serge, that they had to go to a particular country in order to do that helicopter sequence because they couldn't get the insurance coverage to do it anywhere in the US.
Wow. I didn't know that, but it makes sense.
Well, especially with having the main star flying the helicopter himself.
Yeah, and not to disparage Tom Cruise, I know he's one of the few actors who does probably more of his own stunts than anyone working today. And yeah, I'd read that he'd learned how to actually not just fly a helicopter, but actually perform the specific maneuvers in that chase.
Yeah, pretty incredible. I don't think Telly Savalas is flying the crop duster in this movie.
So Telly Savalas, he plays the A&A, the crop duster owner. Is that him?
But which A is he?
Exactly. Probably the funniest line. So good. And how he just calls everyone a pervert. Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
He was there for a day, and I think they actually wanted Donald Pleasance for that role,
Ah, right.
oddly enough.
From Halloween.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. But they went for Telly Savalas because that meant they'd get $500,000 more from the TV networks towards the budget.
Oh, right.
So-
It's funny, though, because I didn't know who Telly Savalas was before I watched this movie.
Same.
Yeah, I think he was most famous for playing a TV detective called Kojak.
Ah, right.
But this was sort of when he was trying to make a shift into movies. And I think he makes a pretty solid impression for the short time that he's on screen. He really injects some fun into the last third of the movie, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
he really does.
So he's probably the funniest. Before he's in the movie, chewing the scenery so spectacularly, really the only source of humor is Sam Waterston's one-liners occasionally.
Oh, there's so many good dry wit lines.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, actually, I think Sam Waterston's kind of lame. I mean, it's quite incredible that he's put in all of these life-threatening situations and he's so dedicated to being the funny guy out of the three. It's sort of admirable, but none of his jokes are actually all that funny.
Yeah. In fact, he's not to get too spoilery, but there's a sequence where when he's on the run, he's climbing up this cliff face. And it's this extended sequence of him climbing up these rocks, and he's telling a joke to no one as he climbs up. And then he reaches the top, and we finally get the punchline. And I suppose that's more interesting than just a 3-minute shot of him climbing the rock face and not saying anything. But you mentioned his persistent dedication to being the funny man, and the image of him literally sweating as he's climbing up this rock face while telling a joke was the perfect image for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I found that scene very, very unintentionally funny as well, because he really doesn't look like he's climbing. He looks like he's just lying down, and they've just tilted the camera to make it look more vertical.
Poor guy. But while we're in the area of writing, I think it is really interesting that so much of the dialogue in this film is fairly witty, actually, it has to be said,
Yeah.
because my memory of it was that, I can't wait to see Elliot Gould's relationship. He's a reporter that's sort of investigating the conspiracy as the film progresses and eventually uncovers it. And I remember him having this really great acerbic relationship with a female reporter, and the back and forth between them was really fun. But actually, they only have 2 scenes together. And
Yeah.
it turns out that he actually has those kinds of conversations pretty much with everybody.
Yeah.
It's just really strange.
I found her character quite unnecessary, really. I mean, I guess, I don't know. The 2 scenes with her in it, if they were cut out, wouldn't have affected the film at all.
His introductory scene is him trying to hook up with this reporter that he works with, as I understood it.
Yes.
And it struck me as this very 1970s workplace casual sexism banter, which he was okay with, seemingly.
She was totally okay with it.
But what got me so much about that scene was that it comes right after one of the tenser scenes in the film, which is just these 9 minutes of Hal Holbrook explaining to the astronauts why they were yanked off the launch pad, and that if they don't cooperate in this Martian landing hoax, that their families are going to die. And then we smash cut to Elliot Gould desperately trying to hook up with his coworker.
Karen Black, who I primarily know for Airport 75, where she's the stewardess that's flying the plane.
Oh, yeah.
Bless her. It's a very strange relationship. I mean, she does actually serve a plot point in that she's the one that directs Elliot Gould to the hangar where they were making the
That's
fake
true.
landing.
That's true.
So she does serve a purpose other than being the person that Elliot Gould speaks to for expositional purposes. See, I was quite interested to talk to you about this, Serge, because you've done a couple of fantastic blogs highlighting sexist tropes in cinema.
Thank you.
And I was wondering how you felt about the representation of women in this movie, because I was sort of thinking maybe this is progressive because she kind of gives as good as she gets.
Yeah.
And certainly for me, it felt a lot more comfortable than when I recently tried to rewatch all of the Airport movies and just was disgusted by the casual sexism on display in those movies. It was just appalling.
So, I'm glad you brought that up. And earlier I had referred to Elliot's playful banter with his coworker. I think I called it casual sexism. It wasn't so much, it felt very consensual. They both liked to pal around, and I'm fine with that. And as you said, she did meet him tit for tat, if you will, and she didn't seem annoyed by him. They seemed like good friends.
Yeah.
So I didn't mind that at all. But while we're on the subject of representation of women, I wanted to mention the wife of the lead astronaut. So it's the wife of James Brolin's character. There's this pivotal scene in the film where the 3 astronauts have got to fake a transmission to their wives and talk about how excited they are to see them and whatnot. And in this scene, James Brolin mentions a trip to Yosemite, a vacation to Yosemite. And for whatever reason, Elliot Gould decides that sounded suspicious. And so he goes to James Brolin's wife and he's like, was there anything about that struck you as odd? And she goes, well, we've never been to Yosemite, but I just thought he had a lot on his mind. And then Elliot Gould is like, aha, he was trying to give us a clue, and then he's off to solve the case. And I just remember thinking, why didn't the writer have the wife, I don't know, bring this suspicion to Elliot Gould's character? I just thought that it almost felt like they were going out of the way to make sure that the wife had nothing to do.
Yeah, it doesn't give her a great deal of agency, does it?
No.
Which is disappointing. I mean, she does have a great scene where she's coming to terms with her grief in one long shot while she's reading Dr. Seuss's Fox in Socks, Bricks and Blocks.
Yes, I like that shot.
It's a great shot. And I also like the scene where Elliot Gould goes to speak to her and he has the same sort of crackling dialogue with her, obviously not making sexual advances because she's
on the astronaut widow.
On the astronaut widow, which would be entirely inappropriate. No, but they kind of have this meta conversation where she beats him to the punch and explains, yes, I realize that you don't want to be interrupting me and you're terribly sorry for my grief, but there's a few questions you have to ask and so on. And she delivers all of his dialogue for him and takes all of the wind out of his sails and kind of gives the sense that, look, I'm not going to spend my time making you feel comfortable around me.
Yeah.
Just have at it. And I thought that was quite good.
No, I did too.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, it might be less. She wasn't being presented as stupid so much as disinterested. And from watching my videos, you might not think this about me, but I always try to claim sexism as the last explanation. So it's not so much that I thought the portrayal of her was sexist. I just thought her disinterest was odd.
Yes. And I think you're probably right in that case. I mean, it's very much a product of its time. And I think one thing that I thought when I was watching this is that Apollo 13 feels like it owes a lot to this movie almost.
I see that.
Yeah, it's a true story. But the whole NASA wives excited and proud thing seems to come from this movie. And the whole plot point about the American public getting annoyed because the reruns of something were cancelled when the live broadcasts were on. And I thought, hang on, that was in Apollo 13 as well. So I don't know whether that's life imitating art or whether it's art imitating a true story that was eventually made into art or which way round that goes.
So O.J. Simpson is in this film, which is its own sort of put a pin in that bullet point. But also it made me wonder, I'm not familiar enough with the history of the NASA space program, but I was wondering, had there been a black astronaut in 1977?
Well, this is something that I actually looked up, and I do think this is progressive because the first African-American astronaut didn't actually come about until 5 years later when Guy Bluford went up in Challenger in 1983. Although he was selected in 1979, so I don't know, when is he an astronaut? When he's selected or when he actually goes? I don't know. But I mean, it's certainly no bad thing that you get to see an African-American man as part of a crew in 1978, but then it's O.J. Simpson.
This is previous to the whole court trial and everything. I did find he was a very token character. I was looking at the runtime. His first line wasn't until about 21 minutes into the film.
Oh, wow.
And his first line is, "I want to throw up," which is not very iconic. And I don't think he was the first choice of the director.
Yeah, I
for
read
the
that
role.
too.
I think he had other people in mind, but because OJ was such a rising star at the time, he had to go with him. But he just wasn't as good as an actor as he could have been.
No.
There's that scene where he's in the desert and he's just kind of mumbling gibberish, going on about wanting water or something, and he starts digging. It's a bit ridiculous. I'm going to put this out there. I found the movie tonally weird. Like there were moments that were very funny, and then there were moments that were very tense, and then there were other moments that were, I don't know, it almost felt like two movies smashed into one movie. So if you cut out all of the Elliot Gould stuff, you could have had this kind of tense action. But if you cut out all of the astronaut stuff and just followed Elliot Gould, it could have been this very interesting, like mystery thriller kind of film. What did you guys think?
So it felt like two movies bolted together. The first one being the astronauts on the run, and then the second one being Elliot Gould, a disgruntled reporter trying to crack the case. And I get that this was just a couple of years after Watergate, and so maybe they thought that only journalists can save the day. But in particular, I thought that cutting back and forth between the group of astronauts on the run in the desert and then Elliot Gould following up on these journalistic leads while people are trying to either kill him or ignore him, you mentioned tonally weird, and I agree with that assessment. I definitely think that they were trying to force two different ways of telling the story into one. For example, there's a scene where Elliot Gould finds the military base where they had been recording all the footage of the surface of Mars, and he sort of like digs around in the dirt and he finds evidence that it had all been faked. I think he finds one of their commemorative medallions as proof that they had been there. And I just felt like it would have worked better in a film where the audience hadn't been watching what was going on with the astronauts the entire time.
Exactly. I completely agree.
Yeah.
If they'd just not shown us that the astronauts were faking it and they revealed it halfway through the movie, it could have been such a great plot twist. That was completely unexpected.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think if the audience just saw the Martian mission going on and maybe they gave us one little bit of foreshadowing and then halfway through the film, we find out that they've been on Earth the whole time.
That would have been quite a mind blow, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I do agree that it is two films. It's like I said, it's kind of like a post-Watergate thriller plus a high-concept summer crowd pleaser.
Right.
The interesting thing to me about that is that following in the footsteps of Woodward and Bernstein and All the President's Men, you would have thought that the journalism half of it would have been the more serious procedural thriller, and the astronauts faking the Mars landing would have been a little bit more fantastical and exciting. But what got me is that the astronaut parts of it are played dead straight, apart from Sam Waterston. And meanwhile, Elliot Gould is going around having meta conversations with everyone, which is so even tonally in each half, it's kind of not what I was expecting.
Yeah, you mentioned Elliot Gould running around having metatextual conversations. He's got his boss at the newspaper. They actually have a conversation where the boss is like, "This is the part where you tell me that you've got a big lead, and I'm going to tell you you've got a week," or something like that. And the conversation goes back and forth.
48 hours, yeah.
Yeah, 48 hours. And then when he bails him out of prison, he leaves him on like, "Frankly, I don't give a damn."
I know.
It's something I can both laugh at while I'm watching it and also being like, why is this in this movie?
So many references.
Yeah, tonally, it's just so strange because two astronauts have been assassinated in the desert. And meanwhile, we're supposed to be having all these laughs.
Hang on. Were they assassinated, the astronauts?
Yes, they were killing them.
I did not realize that. Right. Okay. Wow. That makes it so much more intense now, knowing that. Oh, okay.
I mean, you don't see it because, of course, the twist is that because the heat shield fails, the capsule burns up, and then Brubaker and co realize that they've got to make a run for it because they're effectively dead. So they've got nothing to lose.
So they all pile into this airplane, and then they realize they're out of fuel. They crash land, and then they just wing it in the desert. Just go, okay, we'll just go in opposite directions. We'll see what happens. With no supplies, one can of water each, and a shard of glass. Is that what they had?
I thought it was nice that the survival kit included 3 of each item.
Yeah, lucky.
That's true.
It's almost like they had this in mind.
There's actually a line, which we've been talking about metatextual moments in the film. There's a line right before they all split up where I think James Brolin says something like, "There's too much to say, so let's just get going." It's almost like a meta commentary on like the flippancy with which they're like, "Well, I guess we're on the run now. Let's go."
Yeah, and Sam Waterston, the ever-reliable Sam Waterston, says, "I feel like we're on Mars." And Bill Butler, the cinematographer, who was also the cinematographer on Jaws, I noted, pulls the camera up as the 3 of them, one of them's going north and one of them's going west and one of them's going east or something. So that's basically every direction except the one they've come from. And the camera pulls up to reveal this endless barren landscape. And it's a fantastic shot, and again, brilliantly scored by Mr. Goldsmith. I mean, if we wanted to move on to direction, how do we think Mr. Hyams did directing this movie?
So it's interesting to think of Peter Hyams as a director, for me anyway, because one of the very first bits of trivia I read about him is that he serves as his own cinematographer. for at least the later part of his career. I think it actually started with he directed 2010, the sequel to 2001, and he acted as cinematographer on that. He acted as cinematographer on The Relic, which was my first exposure to his oeuvre. But anyway, getting back to the original question, if I noticed anything about Peter Hyams' directorial style in this particular film, I'd say that he seems to be very much in sync with all of the other people involved in the production, which sounds, I don't know, that sounds very generalized, but I always thought when the shot needed to communicate something, or when the score needed to communicate something, or when two shots needed to be juxtaposed in the right way, it all hit. It's like, even if you don't agree with the film, it was the exact kind of film it wanted to be moment to moment. And I feel like you've got to give the director credit for much of that, for being able to operate all of the keys all at the same time.
One of the things I get when I watch it, certainly from the get-go, the opening sequence, is just how economical it is, and how much it just doesn't waste a single moment just to convey information to the audience in an interesting way. So you've got titles on a black screen with Jerry Goldsmith thundering away, telling you something serious is happening here. It just crashes to black with a date across the screen, which gives you a strong sense of documentary realism or something like this. This is something that happened, maybe. And then the sun rises over Cape Canaveral, while you're hearing a NASA spokesperson sort of relaying information about the mission, so you learn everything about the mission. You get a scene of the astronauts getting ready to get into their capsule, and a NASA employee stands and talks to them about how much this mission means to him and how proud of them he is, and how this is a culmination of his life's work. So you get the sense of why these guys are doing it, and what this means, and what the grander auspices of this whole endeavor are. And straight after that, you get the corrupt politicians arguing over their complementary binoculars, and you get the tension between budget and political power. So you sort of pretty much get everything, all the major themes of the movie laid out for you fairly quickly, and economically, and in different and interesting ways. And when you get to the conspiracy unfolding, and you have 4.5 minutes of the camera just slowly pushing in on the fantastic Hal Holbrook, delivering a monologue.
Standout speech there.
It is. It's electrifying. Hal Holbrook, God bless him, he is still with us. He is 93.
Wow.
But he is still with us. And he specialized in this kind of thing. He was in All the President's Men. He was Deep Throat. And he was also in charge of a corrupt vigilante cop group in the Dirty Harry sequel, Magnum Force. So he's played this kind of guy before.
You mentioned his 4-minute monologue, which I also had, my instinct was to time that speech. And then after his 4-minute monologue, they walk into the next room, which is the Martian soundstage. And he sort of has, it's not a monologue, but it's another 4-minute scene of just him and the 3 astronauts just kind of talking about the situation, which I thought was really bold. It added up to just 8 minutes of these 4 guys in 2 rooms talking to each other. And the way that it wasn't just the dialogue that generated tension, and not just the cinematography, but also the blocking, which you don't necessarily know which specific brain to credit for that. But I noticed there was this one particular shot where Hal Holbrook is facing the 3 astronauts, and the 3 astronauts are facing Hal Holbrook, and they all adopt these stances that really perfectly define their mental states at the time. I think O.J. Simpson turns his back. James Brolin just kind of like squares off against Hal Holbrook rather adversarially. Anyway, I just thought that was a scene that combined dialogue and acting and blocking and cinematography really well.
Yes, and when Hal Holbrook mentions that their families are under threat, it cuts to a different angle on the 3 astronauts with all the lights behind them, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on them, which, it's difficult to pin down Hyams as an auteur, particularly because he's worked in so many different genres. I mean, everything from buddy cop comedy with Running Scared to crime thrillers like Narrow Margin and The Presidio.
He did Time Cop.
Yeah, so some Jean-Claude Van Damme movies in there for good measure. So it's kind of difficult to say this is who he is. And you don't want to call him a journeyman director because that gives you a sense that he's mediocre. He seems to do a very good job regardless of what he's given, I would say.
Right.
Also, that scene on the soundstage, I thought it looked amazing. Like cinematography wise and lighting wise, it just really popped as just an iconic scene.
Yeah. I noticed the ground of the soundstage slopes up to that sort of background that they've got painted on the wall. And it was interesting that you're looking at the soundstage that they've concocted and you realize, oh yeah, this would only fool someone from one angle, which of course that's all that they need because it's going to be faked through the camera.
Yeah, from one angle, which is where Peter Hyams got the idea, apparently. He was working with CBS when they were covering the Apollo missions. And he suddenly realized that you're looking at this historic moment, and rather than having many witnesses or many cameras, you just had one camera. And it suddenly struck him, you could fake this. Now, of course, conspiracy theories have abound ever since about whether this thing actually happened or not.
The moon landing.
Indeed, yeah.
Now it's time for Random Trivia.
Okay, and now it's one of my favourite parts of the podcast. It's where Dan thrills us with some random trivia. And I think because we have a guest, we'll make this a free-for-all and anyone can chip in with some random trivia. But Dan, let's start with you for tradition's sake. What's your random trivia moment?
So the film we're doing, Capricorn One, there are a number of scenes that were just really well filmed. So well filmed, they have been used in other TV shows and movies. So the runaway car scene where Elliot Gould's character, he's in his car and nothing's working, all the brakes not working, and he's just steaming ahead in this runaway car with fast-forwarded footage, and it's been used in other movies apparently, as well as the dogfight scene at the end with the helicopters. So the helicopter scene has been used in episodes of The Fall Guy, which is a 1981 TV series, and also The A-Team in the 80s.
And in the A-Team, I believe they had to add a shot to show that the helicopter pilots got out unscathed, because the A-Team, no matter how many bullets flew and cars crashed, nobody got a scratch on them.
Yeah, and you could always, you would see cars and planes exploding, but then you would hear after it, are you okay? Yep, I'm okay. I'm all good.
There's also, if you've seen Hulk from 2003, the extended chase sequence at the end of the film where all the military's might is pursuing the Hulk through the desert. Anytime you go back and watch, every single time a helicopter crashes, you hear the pilot over the radio saying, I'm okay, but get that thing off me. They wanted to make very clear that Hulk was creating zero collateral damage.
Anyone else with trivia?
I have a random bit of trivia.
Okay.
Yes.
This film stars two of Barbra Streisand's husbands.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Elliot Gould and James Brolin have both been at times married to Barbra Streisand.
Wow.
Indeed, yeah. And James is still married. In
Yes.
fact, they just celebrated their 20th anniversary.
Ah.
And Barbara, of course, is famous for cloning her favourite dog.
She is? She
Yes.
clones her favourite dog?
Yeah, she cloned her favourite dog. So perhaps if she particularly likes this husband, maybe she will clone him too. We will wait and see.
Okay.
So that was our random trivia moments.
Yeah. I wanted to quickly touch on, often when I watch sci-fi movies, I'm always picking out all the scientific inaccuracies. So there are, I don't know, a few things here. You know, when they were stepping out of the spacecraft onto the fake Mars and it was televised, they did this thing where they put it on slow-mo as they were jumping off the platform. And I thought, doesn't Mars have a similar gravity to Earth? Wouldn't they just jump down normally? So I looked it up, and Mars is actually smaller than Earth. So it has the gravity is only 38% of what Earth's gravity is. So there would have been a little bit of a delay as they jumped off, but not that much, I don't think. But a few other things, they're faking this. So when they shoot the rocket ship into space, is it just it's orbiting Earth? I assume just for fun while they're off going to Mars, and then after that it's sent back down to Earth, and no one notices that. No one notices there's a rocket just orbiting around Earth, like all the people in charge.
Well, so one person noticed that the signals were coming in too quickly.
Yes.
That the rocket ship couldn't be broadcasting from Mars.
Yes, and he doesn't last very long, does he? He disappears, and the next time Elliot Gould goes to visit him, because he just happens to be a friend of his apartment is being occupied by a completely random woman who even has the magazine subscriptions to prove it. Which is...
I thought that scene was very unnerving, but at the same time, I already knew what was happening. So if they just edited out all the astronaut stuff for the first half of the movie, that scene could have been really, really unnerving.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the whole conspiracy thriller tropes of the time. So the establishment as this monolithic, all-encompassing evil that will stop at nothing to preserve its lies and secrets and preserve the status quo. And there was this fantasy of people disappearing at the hands of men in dark suits and sunglasses. But in this case, what's interesting about it is that the men in black are black helicopters, which is different.
I found, so the three astronauts fleeing in the desert are chased by these two helicopters that I thought they were like characters among themselves. Like I felt they were almost like cartoon characters, and they would just hover around and be like, do you see any astronauts? Nope, don't see any this way. Let's go over here. And then they just move over here. And it's like, any over here? Nope. Okay, let's go over here. It was like unintentionally funny for me.
On that note, there's this scene towards the end of the film where James Brolin is the last of the three astronauts who's still running around and kicking uncaptured. And he comes across civilization in the form of a gas station. And so it's closed down. He has to break in. And so he's ransacking the place looking for change so that he can call someone from the payphone. And I believe he looks first in the cash register and there's nothing. And then he looks in the soda machine and he finds 1 coin so he can make 1 call. And he makes the call to his family and they don't pick up the phone because they're out and about. And so he's all dejected and he slumps down to the ground next to this big giant window, and then we see the helicopters come into frame.
Yes.
Now, all of that was good, but again, in terms of pacing, I was wondering, why didn't the helicopters come into that scene earlier to maybe ratchet up the tension just a little bit?
Yeah, while he was looking for the coin, that would have been good.
Make it a little bit more urgent.
It is quite a fun shot, though, isn't it?
It is.
That's true. It's they're behind you,
and that's what I mean. It's easy for me to sit here 40 years after the fact and be like, oh, you know what would have improved this good scene and made it great? This detail. But it is still a very good scene.
Oh, it's a great scene. Also, I find it funny watching older movies and coming across situations that you would never come across now. So the fact that he was searching for a coin, I thought he was searching for a drink. I thought he was like, he'd just been in the desert for a few days. He was looking for a Coke or something, but no, a coin in order to operate a telephone that's attached to a wall. I thought that was funny.
As I'm thinking back on that shot where the 2 helicopters appear through the window behind James Brolin right when he sits down, all dejected and sad, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that must have been one hell of a shot to just arrange because there was no CGI.
I thought that too. Yeah, they would have been in radio contact with the helicopter pilots.
Yeah.
They would have probably had to do that scene a few times. And then if it didn't work, they would have to get the helicopters to fly back to where they were, which would have taken a while. Yeah, it must have taken quite a few takes, maybe.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, there's the second time you see the helicopters, they rise up from behind this sand dune, do this weird anthropomorphic thing where they look at each other and then decide on a new direction and swoop off. And then James Brolin emerges from the sand dune that's been out of focus in the foreground all the time, and we rack focus as he shakes the sand off himself. So he's been lying there the whole time. And you realize if the focus puller had not hit the spot, or the sand hadn't come off and stuck in his eyes or something, they'd have to circle those helicopters around and do the whole thing again. Yeah. It's that kind of thing that makes me love this period of movie making, because you look at it and think, wow, a lot of work went into this.
Yeah, for sure.
There's no fixing it in post.
No, not at all.
I thought in terms of theme, this movie definitely felt like, because of the time perhaps in which it was made right after Watergate, that the journalist had to save the day.
Yeah, he does. I mean, it's not as black as some of the post-Watergate conspiracy thrillers were.
Definitely.
So this one has much more of a crowd-pleasing ending with, spoiler alert, James Brolin running in to interrupt his own funeral, which is quite iconic. But again, an example of something that I talked about in our last episode. It's stop printed. It's that slow motion where they didn't do slow motion at the time. They just reprint the same frame over and over again, and the gaps get longer and longer and longer.
Do you want to know just how slow they advance the frame? Because I counted.
Oh, yes.
Oh, go for it.
The film advances 18 frames in 11 seconds.
Wow.
That's pretty bad.
I think that's about 1/15th the speed of 24 frames per second.
Yeah.
It did really take you out of the scene, because it was just like, wow, this is taking a long time. And it didn't feel like classic slow motion.
That's not good.
It's really not.
Coming to you live from the Movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
Yes, welcome to the Mobley Awards, which is where we nominate some of our favourite parts of the film in a number of completely frivolous categories. And this time it'll be even more fun with our guests. So let's get started with our usual first category, favourite quote. And with all that crackling dialogue that we've talked about, there's going to be a lot of choice selections here, I suspect. So, Serge, what was your favourite?
Probably, so it would have to be one of the Sam Waterston quips. Of the many to choose from, my favorite was when they're faking a transmission back to their wives, and the very first thing that Sam Waterston says when his wife is like, "How are you?" he says, "I told you never to call me here."
That's actually a pretty good one. Yeah, one of my favorites is when they realize the heat shield has failed and they're all ostensibly dead. Brolin is trying to hammer this into them. Our lives are in danger here. And he says, "We're dead." And Sam says, "Shit, and I was such a terrific guy."
Oh, yeah.
Which I really like. Dan, what about you?
I mean, this is a pretty classic quote from the movie. It's when they're waiting in the room and Dr. Calloway comes in, and I think Sam Waterston again says, "Hello, Dr. Calloway. Nice to see you. A funny thing happened on the way to Mars."
That could be the tagline for the movie.
Yeah. It could be, actually. It would sum up the tone quite well. So we're in the 70s. Sexism abound, but aside from that, what is the most typically 70s moment? I mean, the thing that struck me the most as an ex-smoker is just how much smoking goes on in this movie, and in every conceivable place, NASA control rooms. I'm surprised the astronauts didn't light up inside the module, to be honest. Serge, what did you think?
My most 70s scene is when the cops bust in on Elliot Gould's apartment to search it and then discover some planted cocaine, and the first thing the cop does is taste it, of course. First thing they teach you in detective school.
Yeah, you have to rub it on your gums or something, don't you?
I could just imagine some other movie from the 70s where, like, they're busting up some heroin den and the cop, like, ties the knot around his arm and like cooks it on a spoon and injects it. He's like, "Yep, this is heroin."
Dan, how about you?
So I think my most 70s moment, which is more prevalent in cop movies and action movies, but it happened in this movie as well. So Elliot Gould's character, he's in his car, he's lost control, he's driving around, and then he drives off a bridge into the water in slow motion, which is pretty standard scene in every single 70s action movie. You have to drive your car off a bridge into the water.
Well, and as you pointed out in the trivia moment, it probably is in every cop show. It's this scene.
True. Exactly.
Reused. How about best hair or clothing?
In terms of hair, I just noticed that Sam Waterston's hairstyle hasn't changed in 40 years.
That's true. It's just gone slightly grey.
Which is fine. It works great for him, but
It does, yeah. He struck gold when he picked his first hairstyle and just, it's lasted. It's great. I mean, my favourite is Hal Holbrook. Bless Hal Holbrook. Is that epic quiff and side parting that he's got going on there.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't know how much hairspray is involved in that level of quiff, but it's pretty serious, that one.
Yeah.
Favorite scene? Do we have a favorite scene? I mean, I'm going to take first dibs on the helicopter biplane chase, which I just think stops the movie dead because it's so fantastic.
it definitely wakes you up.
And again, I think it's because it's all practical because this is the pre-CGI era, and this was the era when they would do crazy things with helicopters.
Yeah. But what was so especially jarring about the scene was not just its execution, but I'm trying to think of what approximated an action scene up until that point in the film. I think maybe one of the characters broke into a run at some point.
Yeah, I think there's the breakout scene, which is probably the most famous cue from Goldsmith because it's intercutting between speechifying on Hal Holbrook's part, saying what fine men they were and what a shame it was that they're dead, and them trying to escape and steal a plane. But other than that, I don't think you had a great deal. You're right. So, Serge, what was your favorite scene?
So mine was definitely, it started with the 4-minute Hal Holbrook monologue. And then they walk into the next room, and then the scene continues for another 4 minutes of these guys just talking it out and kind of assessing the stakes, not just the circumstances, but also the stakes, which remain unstated for as long as possible. In fact, I think Hal Holbrook has a line in there where he's like, "What, do you want it spelled out for you?" They just hold back on articulating the threat for as long as possible. And for those 8 minutes, it's just, I love, especially in action movies or espionage movies or some movie that focuses on loud external conflict, you've just got these moments where it's just people talking in a room and it couldn't be more tense.
And it's a lost art. You well, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I kind of feel like this, you don't get to see this kind of dialogue delivered this well very often anymore. So Dan, how about you? What was your favorite scene?
My favorite scene was the funniest scene, was when the Telly Savalas character is talking to Elliot Gould. It's just a really hilarious scene with a lot of just completely out of the blue hilarious lines. Yeah.
I do love the back and forth on the how much does it cost to hire your crop dusting plane to dust some crops, and he says $25, and he says, okay, I want to hire it, and he says, okay, $100. And he says, you just said 25, and he says, well, you're not a farmer and I think you're a pervert. Because that's Telly Savalas' answer to everything in this movie. You're a pervert.
It is.
Fantastic. Again, another shot in the arm in the third act, I think.
Yeah.
So, cliche time. What did we think is the most cliched moment? For me, it would be the freeze frame at the end of the movie.
I think that was mine too.
Yeah. Although, as I've mentioned before, the wonderful Harry Potter movie, the Azkaban movie, which is probably the best one, finishes with a freeze frame, which kind of almost undoes the 2.5 hours of great work that Alfonso Cuarón had done up until that point.
Yeah.
But there we go. So Dan, what about you? What was your cliche?
So it wasn't really cliche in terms of 70s, but it was cliche in terms of deserts.
Ah.
So every time characters seem to go into the desert, they're always likely to run across either a rattlesnake or a scorpion. And in this movie, we see both of them.
Yeah.
But
We do.
To the film's credit, there was a real scorpion, and it wasn't like an emperor scorpion, which is those big black scorpions that you see in every film, and they're not poison. Well, I mean, they are poisonous, but they can kill like crickets with their poison. It wasn't an emperor scorpion. It was an actual like desert yellow scorpion, which seemed a lot more dangerous, and it was almost made it all the way to his eye, which was open for much of the shot.
Yeah, and it's James Brolin himself, and it's not on a sheet of glass.
Right, exactly.
Right, yes.
It's pretty cool. How about effects? Now, this being the 70s, a lot of practical effects in here. Do we have a favorite special effect, practical or otherwise?
What I particularly liked was in the final chase sequence with the helicopters and the biplane. I think I mentioned it earlier, but the helicopter uses its landing strut to tap the top of the biplane's wing. And I assumed that was done with toys or something. I just assumed that they would not attempt a stunt that risky. But then apparently it was real.
Yeah, it's real, which is, really scary.
Yeah.
I think there's another moment like that I thought was good, which is when they're stealing the plane to get away from the hangar. The random guys in dark suits, the men in black, park two cars across the runway to try and stop them, and they just manage to get away, but they lose one piece of landing gear. And it actually does fire up in the air as they're going over the cars. Now, I've no doubt that they weren't actually all that close, and we're just seeing a very long lens so that the distance is crushed, but still to sequence it so that the men in front are diving onto the ground and the cars are shaking and the landing gear fires up and bounces across the screen as though it's come off the plane. I thought that's pretty amazing, and again, a lot of coordination to pull that off.
Now that you mention it, in a couple minutes later, when the plane basically has a glorified crash, an emergency landing, they obviously, I don't think they really crashed the plane, but they did a good job, I thought, of hiding the landing gear, hiding the point at which the plane comes into contact with the desert floor. It's clearly landing on a runway and they're just kicking up a bunch of dust, but I thought they hid it in a way that didn't yank you out of the movie. It never reminded me that it was a special effect until right now.
Yes. Yeah, it's very, very well done. And again, another example of Peter Hyams being really clued in with every single member of his crew to pull off a sequence like that. So, Dan?
I really liked the runaway car scene, even though you could tell the footage was just being sped up. So they rigged the camera so that it was like attached to the front of the car. So it felt like you were just, as an audience watching the film, you felt you were really getting propelled forward as if you were in one of those VR videos or whatever. So yeah, I thought that was really well choreographed and shot.
Okay, so from visual effects to sound effects, do we have a favorite sound effect? And I always swing by Dan first, being the sound designer that he is.
So 70s sound in film is always pretty bad. Things always. This wasn't so bad. Like there was a decent amount of Foley and stuff in there. I found the sound that they use. So the character Brubaker, played by James Brolin, he's hiding from the helicopters. He's buried in sand, and when he emerges, it sounds like he's emerging from an egg or something. It's like this crackling sound as the ground kind of crackles as he comes up from the sand. And I thought, what is going on there? How long has he been in that sand for?
It's a lot of sweat, maybe, congealing. That's nasty. I mean, for me, I quite liked, and I'm not sure whether this is the sound designer or whether it's Mr. Goldsmith, but the buzzing synthesizer noise that announces that one of the astronauts has flatlined.
Yes.
When the heat shield fails. And so they have all of the astronauts' heart monitors flatline, and it's one after the other, and each one of them has a slightly different pitch, and the end result
Oh, wow.
is this mounting tension of discord, so it just gets worse as the scene progresses. And I'm not sure whether that was Jerry, because he was all in for his synthesizer experimentation in those days. But yeah, I thought it was a very effective way of ramping up the tension in the scene.
Great. And Serge?
If I've got a favorite sound effect, it's probably when Sam Waterston climbs that cliff telling his joke, and then he delivers the punchline at the top. And then, since we're spoiling everything, there are the 2 military helicopters waiting for him at the top. And the camera zooms way out. So you see the entire cliff face, the entire desert landscape. And over this shot, he just keeps repeating the punchline. And
The roof.
And it just...
The roof!
Yeah. And it just keeps reverberating wider and wider as the shot goes wider and wider. And I thought I was going to throw out the word effective, but I'm not sure if that's the right word. It was, say emblematic. Let's euphemistically say emblematic.
Yeah, I think you're edging towards cliched there, but so on to our star rating for Fake Blood, which is a category that I think that we've increasingly regretted the more that we've done non-horror films, but we are where we are. There's very little blood in this movie.
There is one particular scene that has blood in it, notable for being, I suspect, real blood in it, when James Brolin who plays astronaut Brubaker, is hiding out in a cliff, and I suppose he's very hungry. He's confronted by a rattlesnake, and he smashes its head with a rock, and then he flips it over, and then slices open its belly, and then exposes its innards, lifts the snake carcass to his mouth, and then takes a sort of hesitating chew on it. And that was either the greatest prosthetic snake I've ever seen, or they really killed some poor snake and made Josh Brolin take a bite out of it on camera.
Oh, no.
You could really feel the sense of, I don't want to do this on his face there. So.
I have this sort of unofficial policy when it comes to animals' use in film. As a rule, I don't want any animal to die just for the sake of a movie, but I also have this little loophole where if somebody eats the animal, then it's serving some purpose other than entertainment.
Right.
So, I don't know. That might sound like a lame rationalization, but I did think to myself, well, at least he took a bite.
Well, I think I did some research into this, and I think I read somewhere that it wasn't actually a dead snake, and he wasn't actually eating snake meat. It's actually tuna.
Oh.
Yeah, he's actually scoffing down on some tuna and ketchup.
That makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah. Apparently it was the one scene that airlines demanded that they cut from the movie before they would show it.
Oh, wow.
Various plane crashing incidents, no problem, but eating a snake, yuck. Very. So our final category is funniest scene, which is usually, in Dan's case, the most inappropriate laughter. So Dan, what have you got for us this time?
So we've mentioned it before. I found the helicopters just hilarious. I mean, it was ridiculous. The fact, the way that they would rise up and then turn to each other as if they were discussing something, and then just turn off and then fly away in a different direction. It was, I don't know what they were thinking with that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think the anthropomorphization of them is a mistake, because otherwise they are good as iconic representations of this oppressive, faceless organization that's out to get them. I don't know why they look at each other all the time. It's so daffy.
Oh, it's hilarious though.
For me, although you liked it, actually, I do find the undercranking on the runaway car scene hilarious. I wish they'd just shot it straight and just had him going at a normal speed.
Yeah, I know. And that scene did kind of go for a bit longer than it should have. Like he's driving a fair distance before he goes off
Well,
the bridge.
he's got to find a bridge, right?
I guess so.
Preferably one over water.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's probably looking for some stacks of fruit and guys with a pane of glass or something.
Yeah. Roadworks and signs to drive through.
A stroller that's not actually carrying a baby.
Yeah, definitely. Just a pile of cans. Oh, all the cliches. No, any undercranking on scenes like that, I just think, why did they think this was a good idea in the 70s? It happens in Bond movies too, and it's such a shame. And that is the Mobley Awards.
Woohoo! Okay, so it's that time of the podcast for the final verdict. Do you two gents think this movie should be shot out into fake space? Or do you think it should be thrown back into the dungeons of the oubliette? Conrad, you chose this film. What did you think?
Well, I picked this film because I think it's a really fun example of the late 70s conspiracy cycle. It has a science fiction-y element to it. It's got some great performances, some fantastic dialogue, some ingenious cinematography, and a Jerry Goldsmith score that puts many scores to shame, quite frankly. So I still think watching it again, I mean, I can see that in comparison to modern movie making, it takes a long time and takes a few leaps that perhaps a film today wouldn't take, like 4 minutes of one person speaking. But I'd like it for that. I mean, a lot of the things that it takes its time over and a lot of the things that it does, I actually really enjoy. So I'd have to say, I do think it should be more appreciated and more widely known. So, I mean, I'm all still thumbs up. I don't think it's childhood nostalgia talking. I think it really deserves to be preserved. Mm-hmm. Serge is our guest. What did you think?
I, too, think that it should be liberated. In all honesty, I have no clue how it ended up in the oubliette in the first place. Even by modern standards, it's got a score that sounds very much contemporary. It's got actors who are high profile even still today. Even if it's just kind of a trivia, you say that O.J. Simpson is at it and people go, what? But even and then even James Brolin, most theater goers these days, they know him as the father of Josh Brolin. But then Sam Waterston, everybody still recognizes him. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of reasons why this film would be popular today, and it's kind of, I stumbled upon it completely by accident while going down some Wikipedia rabbit hole, and I have no idea why it's not more popular.
Dan, how about you? Because you had not seen this film before.
Yeah, well, I think I do think it's a great film, but I do think it has flaws. I found tonally it was really a bit all over the place, and it almost felt like it didn't quite know what sort of film it was. And even pacing wise, it had such strange acts to it. I guess like the first act was quite contained, and then they were in the desert, and that just seemed really strange to me that they would just willingly try to survive the desert. And then the final dogfight was incredibly action-packed, but it kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't expect it. But in saying all of that, acting was amazing. The editing and cinematography was amazing. The story itself was really interesting, and I'm surprised it hasn't been done before. I feel like this film was very 70s, and I would actually love it to be remade in the modern era with sort of more modern, more modernized, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of one of those films that had a lot going for, and it was almost there, but didn't quite do it as well as, other films like Alien, or, I mean, the completely different genre of film. But yeah, I do think it should be released.
It appears that we are all in agreement. So there is going to be no need for the coin of fate this week.
No?
There wouldn't have been anyway unless I was really confused.
Ambivalent or something. Yeah. Don't know. Okay, so I guess this little guy should be strapped to a rocket and set free.
What's with all these lights and cameras, though?
I know, it's strange. So very pleased to see another one of my choices escaping the fold. Dan, what are you going to be hauling out for us to talk about next time?
I thought we could do a double blind episode. So we're going to choose a film that we both have not seen.
Scary.
So the film that we will be taking a look at next time is a 1985 horror called The Stuff.
Oh,
Stuff.
I haven't seen it either, which is interesting. But it's on my Netflix queue.
Oh, it's on Netflix in the US. Amazing.
Oh, the Netflix mailing service.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be fun. But sadly, Serge will not be with us.
I'll be with you in spirit.
Yes, but it has been fun. Thanks for joining us for this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been a lot better at this than we have been.
Yeah. Yeah, look out for Serge's podcast coming soon, I'm sure.
So, where can we find you, Serge?
So my videos are on YouTube under the channel name Cold Crash Pictures. It's Cold Crash Pictures for every single social handle except Twitter. It had to be Cold Crash Pics.
And if anybody is interested in following us on our socials and commenting, then you can find us at Movie Oubliette on all of our channels. And if you're not quite sure how to spell oubliette, it's something like this.
Wait, I think there was an issue with the transmission. Could you say that one more time? Okay, there, got it.
Yeah, I think that'll do the trick.
Oh, and please give us a rating and review on iTunes or whatever other podcast platform you're using. Really helps us out.
Yes, and affirms our self-worth.
It sure does.
Can confirm.
Okay, well, thanks to our guest and thanks to all of you guys listening. See us next time. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and